Welcome back, it's me Lou. For today's video, it's going to be a special video as we focus on a custom action figure that I made last night. Okay, so if you watched my videos previously, I made a custom McFarlane DC Multiverse WILDC.A.T.S Grifter. Grifter was a character from the 1990s comic book WILDC.A.T, which was created by artist Jim Lee and published by Image Comics and produced by Wildstorm Studios. It was also a cartoon during the mid-90s produced by Nelvana Studios. The comic book also saw a line of action figures produced by Playmates. So after I made my Grifter action figure, I kind of got the bug to try to make another WILDC.A.T.S figure. So I decided to try to make the field team leader, the character known as Spartan. Spartan is a cyborg, and he's under the mentorship of the character Emp, who oversees, I believe it's Halo Enterprises, I believe. So the comic was way back when, in the 90s. It was after Jim Lee left X-Men. He wanted to pursue his own line of comic books through Image Comics, and WILDC.A.T.S was born. If you're familiar with the comic book, here's a quick flashback to the 90s. This was the collected trade edition of the comic book miniseries. I think this miniseries was maybe only like 4 issues, I think. So this is WILDC.A.T, stands for, and the CATS is an acronym, stands for Covert Action Teams. And here's the character that I made, the field team leader Spartan. Now my figure, it's not exact to the comic book. This was a project where more so, it's kind of like what I like to call a proof of concept. I kind of had the idea in my head of what I wanted to make, and it was mostly motivated by the fact that I had some leftover pieces from some other McFarlane action figures, and I'm like, I want to put these pieces to use. I don't want them to just sit around or collect dust in my like parts bin. I actually want to make something out of it. So I went ahead and I thought it'd be kind of a hard figure to make. Conceptually, the figure wasn't that bad in terms of trying to figure out which pieces to use and how to get them to work. It was more of a nightmare of actually painting the figure, and we'll go into that in a little bit. But back to the character of Grifter. Here's Grifter on the cover of the trade paperback. I tried to maintain the same color scheme, mostly with the blues and reds. And WILDC.A.T.'s Covert Action Team. And then here's the cover to the first issue. And as you can see, there's Spartan right here. So we have Spartan. Like I said, this is more of a proof of concept. I took some creative liberties. I kind of just had to work with the parts that I had on me. So I wasn't going to get full on 100% accurate. If I could hit all the major landmarks like the tactical harness and try to get the tuft of hair popping through the top of his hood, and then the belt, and at least, try to get the color scheme to somewhat match, that was important to me. Let's see if we find another image of Spartan. And there's cover to issue 2. Here he is in the background with the whole team. You have Maul, you have Void, you have Grifter, who I made recently as a custom action figure, Zealot, you have Voodoo. I think the only character this is missing is, oh, there it is, Blade. Blade and Emp, they're right there. And then there's Spartan again. So it's a very 90s looking character. Here's some of the concept art that Jim Lee used to design Spartan initially. So this is originally the figure I kind of really wanted to make. This wasn't the final design. This was kind of during the concept stages of the character's development. It was going to be impossible for me to recreate this shoulder and arm piece, because the way his costume works is that the sleeve is really high up, and it's almost like a 90s or 80s fashion thing with the shoulder pad. and it kind of creates a triangle for the upper torso of the body, and there was no way I was going to be able to recreate that. One thing I had to compromise on was this really tall collar up here. It's kind of unrealistic in design when you try to make it physically. I tried looking up some custom Spartan action figures online, and it seemed like 90% of the time people would try making this out of like epoxy or Sculpey, and it just looked like it was made of epoxy or Sculpey. So that's the one thing I kind of wanted to avoid. I mean, when I was younger, I used to sculpt on a lot of pieces onto my action figures, but nowadays, if I could take a piece off another action figure or find something that's already prefabricated and try to find a way to get it to work, I'll do that. But there was no way in hell I was going to be able to recreate this collar and make it look clean. Fortunately, the body I was using for this figure kind of had a tall collar, but it doesn't extrude outward like this one does. And then here's one of the earlier designs of Spartan. Instead of the tactical harness, he had chains on his shoulders, which doesn't really make any sense. He had like a number 7 on his chest. It was like on a badge. I really wanted to add that, but that wasn't part of the final design. So let's see if we can find another image of him before we move on. Here's a sequence in the comic book where, so he's an android or a cyborg, and then he kind of got the crap kicked out of him, and he lost an arm. Here's Rob Liefeld's Youngblood, if you're familiar with that superhero team. And here's Spartan getting his ass handed to him by Chapel. So here is the original Spartan figure made by Playmates. I think this came out in 94 or 96. And I think I did a review on this, so you might want to check my back catalog of videos. So this figure is pretty damn accurate to what's seen in the comic book. It has the asymmetrical leg design, has the triangle torso, the high collar. Everything about this figure works. This is a really nice figure too. Even though it only has, I think, maybe like 5 or 6 points of articulation, it's well sculpted, and it feels like a 90s action figure, which is not a bad thing. So here's a quick comparison to mine. So as you can see, there's mine is kind of like an approximation to what this guy is. It's not like comic book accurate. I wanted to maintain the harnesses here, the red belt. I really wanted to do the asymmetry on the legs, but the figure I was using, it had these 2 like upper thigh guards, so I had to like just deal with that. This guy has a strap over his right leg. Mine's on the left. I took some creative liberties with the color scheme on the boots. And if you look here, the boots, for whatever reason, as the paint, so I painted this last night and I sealed it this morning, but for whatever reason, the paint is starting to like shrink, and I used 3 layers, and for whatever reason, it's shrinking and flaking off in certain areas. And we'll talk about the creative process of actually constructing this in a little bit. But yeah, painting this guy was a nightmare, but I don't know. So yeah, this is kind of like a side-by-side comparison. Mine's not accurate by any means, but this was more so a challenge. I wanted to see if I could make a figure that, that closely resembled Spartan, and something I could display with my custom grifter figure. Okay, so let's talk about this guy a little bit more in depth. So the base body of this figure is actually the McFarlane DC Multiverse Batman Dark Detective figure. So that makes use of the Dark Detective's head, body, and legs. The arms are taken from the DC Multiverse Gotham Knights Nightwing. That's based off the Nightwing design for the upcoming Arkham Knights video game. And the belt here, I believe, is taken from, I want to say, a G.I. Joe Classified series figure, I think. I can't remember which one, though. The tactical harness is made up of a couple of different pieces. From this point to this point back here, and this point to this point back here, that's taken from the G.I. Joe Classified Series Duke. That's kind of like that shoulder strap he has. The lower portion here of the tactical harness is actually a zip tie, and I just cut it to fit and just painted it red. The belt buckle here, I don't remember where I got that from. The power pack on his back, this is taken from the G.I. Joe Classified Series Duke. I think that's Duke's binoculars. The reason why I had to put this in here is because if you look carefully, there's like a hole in his back. So the Dark Detective figure, this was the first release, had that long trench coat, and the trench coat is actually plugged into the figure. And then when you have to like forcibly remove the coat to separate it from the body, and once you do, there's this giant hole. So I had to fill the hole up, so I just used Duke's binoculars as a power pack, and it was also a way I could join the straps together. Now this piece down here running down the spine, that's a zip tie cut to fit and painted blue. Alright, let's look at this guy up close. The hair is actually from a Masters of the Universe. No, WWE Masters. No, it's from the Masters of the WWE Universe made by Mattel. And this is the Roddy Piper hair. I had to like rip it off his head, and then I had to cut it to fit. And it's not as simple as it sounds, because you actually have to shave the underside of the hair just so it could conform to the shape of the figure's skull. The mask kind of works, but like I said, I had to take some creative liberties. Spartan's mask in the comic book and in the animation does not have... Let me get this into focus. It does not have the chin strap or chin guard in front. And the eyelets are a lot larger in the comic book, exposing his flesh and his real eyes. This was a compromise. I kind of just dealt with it because I didn't have another head on hand I could work with. In my head, the fiction behind this figure is that maybe this is Spartan, like close to 30 years later from when he originally debuted. So maybe he's going to look a little bit older. And the haircut kind of fits because it's kind of like that 90s skater haircut. So it's kind of weird because in my head, there's maybe like a 40-year-old man with like a teenager's haircut. But it kind of worked, at least I think so. So up close, here's Spartan's head. The lighting conditions, the light's kind of blowing out the detailing, so it's kind of hard to see his features. He's kind of gritting his teeth. There's his chest. I like the Dark Detective figure a lot. It's a great base body. The armor is very unique. There are the arms. Alright, so I'm not sure if you hear that. There's sirens going off right now. So just don't worry about the emergency sirens. Just try to ignore that. There's his gloves. Now, this is where it's getting weird. Like I said, with the paint, all of a sudden the paint's starting to flake off and just like shrink for whatever reason. So I kind of wanted to shoot this video now before this thing fell apart even more. Painting McFarlane figures, it's a nightmare. I don't know how other customizers do it. McFarlane figures, they're made of such a softer plastic. Okay, so let's talk about constructing this guy and painting him. So if you're a customizer or if you're an aspiring customizer, I just kind of want to share these tips with you. Okay, so like I said, the head for the hair was a separate piece. I had to shave the underside with an X-Acto knife just so it conformed correctly to the skull. That's something that I kind of did really foolishly and impulsively because if I messed up, I would have lost that hair piece and I wouldn't be able to work with it. So a lot of times you kind of have to dry fit pieces together just to see if it'll work. And when I say dry fit, that means you're not committing to gluing the pieces together just yet. So I kind of had to dry fit it and then see if the hair would fit comfortably. If not, I'd take the X-Acto knife and start shaving underneath until it fit the skull just right. Also, when you cut with an X-Acto knife, you want to make sure that, when you produce a cut, how will the cut look once it's attached to the figure? You know, if you cut a piece the wrong way, you'll see the cut and it'll look very deliberate. You know, so for here on the hair, I had to make sure that when I cut, I'd have to cut inside on a diagonal, just so the cut wouldn't be revealed on the top side of the figure. You know, the cut's more so on the inside. It's kind of hard to explain. It's something you really have to see visually as you're doing it. The straps here, you know, this was made of multiple pieces. I had to glue the pieces together using Gorilla Super Glue, and that's the gel kind. So this rubber plastic strap from Duke was glued onto this hard plastic zip tie. And the straps themselves was glued into place using the Gorilla Glue. I like Gorilla Glue a lot, especially the gel stuff. It's really strong. The only thing is you have to make sure you hold the pieces together for maybe like, you know, 30 seconds to a minute before you let go, just to make sure it's so that the adhesive's working correctly and that the bond is really strong. You don't want to use too much glue, because if you're holding the pieces together, the glue will kind of like squirt out of the sides, and the next thing you know, you've glued your hands to the figure. So use the glue sparingly and in the right places. The straps here, they're made of a hard plastic, so to get them to bend at, you know, I needed the straps to bend so it could conform to the body, and once I glued it, you know, I had to make sure that the straps are bent just so that they would adhere correctly to the body, because this is a really hard plastic, and if I didn't find a way to make this bend, I don't think the strength of the glue would hold this down. So what I had to do was create a score mark, and that's you take an X-Acto knife and very carefully cut the top of where you want the harness to bend. So if you look carefully right here, there's a small incision going across, but I don't cut all the way through. I just cut enough so that on the back side of the strap there's still some material left, and then I could kind of flex it and it'll bend and it'll conform to the shape of the body right here. And I did the same on the other strap right there. I glued this rubber buckle using Gorilla Glue Super Glue, much like the rest of the figure. The belt fit pretty comfortably around the stock torso here. I just had to glue it in place. And those are the, you know, the physical, real big changes. I want to say the arms. Oh yeah, the sockets. It's a ball socket that holds in place, and then the actual joint that attaches to the body. I had to swap the actual joint piece of the figure. So when I made a custom, I think it was my custom Grifter action figure, because it used the arms from this guy, the original figure. I had to swap out the joints, and the way I did that is I took an X-Acto knife and just cut out one half of the posts on one side, submerged it in hot water and bent it out and just pulled out the joint. Again, it's one of those things where you have to actually experience it to understand what I'm talking about, because visually I can't really demonstrate it because the joint's inside of the figure right now. So we'll talk about what I consider the most important part is painting. Now, just to let you know, I do not consider this a good paint job. This is a very rough overnight paint job. I had no aspirations of making this thing look professional. You know, I kind of wanted to give it the most basic paint job possible just because I wanted to finish this project. So for me, a basic paint job is something that looks like it just came straight out of the factory. You know, I wanted to at least make it look like a basic action figure. You know, there's no washes, really. There's no highlighting. It's just strictly the base color. Ideally, if I had the time, I'd go back and highlight it and shade it and, you know, use washes. But I also want this to look like a stock action figure. And for the most part, most McFarlane figures, like 90% of the figure is this very, very basic in their paint job. The only thing that might see like some complexity is in the face. You know, some of the faces have more detail and even some washing. And that's what I did here. I just kind of added a wash to the ears and then a face just to bring out the wrinkles and create some sort of sense of depth and volume. But the nightmare in painting this thing was that McFarlane figures, they're made of a very soft, it's almost like a rubbery plastic. It's hard to touch, but then if you submerge it in hot water, it becomes almost like very rubbery and spongy. So it's not like a solid, like polystyrene plastic, like a model kit. You know, for me, painting that stuff is like painting, it's like easy. It's like, you know, the work goes by smoothly. when you're working with these softer rubbery plastics, you run into so many complications. For example, the hair here is made of a softer rubber plastic, and then when you paint it, I primed it first, but when you paint it, for whatever reason, it reacts very violently with the plastic, and then the plastic starts to like almost feel like it's melting, or it's just really tacky. So it was a nightmare because every time I try handling the figure, I'd forget that the hair would be tacky, and then I'd get fingerprints on it and get the paint all over my hands. It was a nightmare. Same with the harnesses. They're made of a softer rubbery plastic, so they're not taking the paint as well as I'd like. The arms took the paint the best just because they're made of a stiffer plastic. But yeah, it was kind of a nightmare. The crotch area, the harnesses, and the hair, since they were such soft materials, they just would not take the paint right. But one thing I figured out later on, and I kind of regret not learning about it sooner, is that, so there's a product called Modge Podge. Modge Podge is actually a PVA glue that's really watered down with some flow aid in it. PVA glue is kind of like essentially that white glue you use in school. You know, it's kind of like Elmer's glue, but it's just watered down. A lot of hobbyists, crafters, and model makers, you know, and people that make props, they use Modge Podge a lot. And they offer it in a spray bottle also, so it's almost like you can mist it on. So my suggestion is this, because this is how I got rid of like dealing with tacky paint. And one way to avoid it is before you paint the figure and before you prime the figure, try sealing the figure first with spray on Modge Podge. You can use the matte sealant and apply one coat, let it dry for maybe an hour, add a second coat, let it dry for an hour, and then apply a third coat, let it dry for an hour. And so what that does, that seals over the plastic so that if you do decide to spray paint it with a primer or paint over it, the paint won't react violently with the softer plastic. So that's something I kind of learned. You know, your results might vary, but I just wanted to share that tip with you because, you know, you might have the like most brilliant idea for a custom and you might actually be able to like pull it off constructing it physically. But then once you get to that painting stage, that's where like some of the nightmare problems begin, because what you'll find out is that an action figure is not made of the same plastic all around. Like the durability and the head might be made of a different diameter than like of the body. You know, the head might be made of a harder plastic. The body might be a softer plastic. You know, they might react differently to the paints. So, you know, this is something to keep in mind. You know, like for me, as soon as I got this figure painted up, it looked great. But then as the paint started to dry, I ran into all these weird issues. The figure became disgusting to hold. It was super tacky. But then once I sealed it with Modge Podge, the tackiness went away, and as you can see, I can handle it now. But for the most part, the paints you use in the store, they're never going to be as durable as a manufacturing paint. You know, so even though I didn't handle these shin guards, stuff's already kind of cracking and flaking off because of some sort of weird reaction. But that comes with the territory. And also beware of stuff like joint rub. You know, you might apply a primer and even like 3 or 4 coats and think it's very durable. But the minute you start moving stuff around, paint starts chipping off. So just be aware that's just part of the process. You know, it's almost impossible to make the perfect custom action figure. Alright, so I'm losing my voice. I've been filming a lot of videos, so I'm going to wrap this up. So I just wanted to share this with you. It's my custom Spartan action figure. I might have accidentally called him Grifter a couple of times now that I think about it. But it's Spartan. I love the character a lot. If you're a fan of the Wildcats or 90s comic books, I hope this was a nice trip down memory lane for you. So wrapping this up, once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning subscriber or viewer, thank you so much for your continued support. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. All right, later.